Hello and welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading. My name is David, and today I would like to introduce you to a modern classic of Japanese literature. That is the novel The Temple of the Golden Pavilion by Mishima Yukio, or as he is usually called in many Western countries, Yukio Mishima, because unlike in Japan, we tend to put the first name before the family name. This video is part of an initiative by a couple of Italian-speaking booktubers who have joined and who, under the motto Pezzi d'autore, that means pieces of an author, get together once or twice a year and to choose an author and divide up the literary works of that authors and publish their review videos in sync and always on the same date at the same time. So if you understand Italian and you would like to gain a broader overview of Mishima's literary work, I invite you to visit the videos that have just been published on the 7 other Italian channels. You can find the link to these channels in the info box of my parallel Italian language video on the same book, also published today. So let's get started. In this video, I will first say a few words about the author, Mishima Yukio, and in the second part, I will discuss his novel, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. And you can, of course, select the book review directly by using the timestamps if you're not interested into the life of the author, or if you're already familiar with it. So Mishima Yukio lived from 1925 to 1970. So this year, 2025, marks his 100th, the 100th anniversary of his birth, and which is also one of the reasons for this series of videos about him and his works. Mishima was considered a member of Japan's literary avant-garde. He was highly regarded in Japan and internationally. He was even considered a candidate for the Nobel Prize in Literature several times in the 1960s, but he was never awarded the prize. I think probably this was due to his very polarizing, conservative and nationalistic political views. In his works, this shows us in his works, he repeatedly propagated traditional Japanese values and culture. He strongly opposed the westernization of Japan, and he was ardently advocating Shintoism, this specifically Japanese religion, which is also a kind of state philosophy. As the head of state, the emperor or the tenno, had the status of a deity. And Mishima not only advocated the restoration of this original Japanese culture, religion, and form of government in his literary works, he also wrote clear philosophical and political essays on this matter, such as an essay with the title Defense of a Culture. And he also attempted to achieve his political goals in reality, so which in the end led to his tragic downfall. In November 1970, he and a couple of political friends, they occupied the Japanese Ministry of Defense. They took the commander as a prisoner or as a hostage, and they gave a speech from the balcony of the building of the ministry to the military, calling for a coup to overturn the current constitution and to re-establish that traditional political system. But when it became clear that no one would follow them, that this whole coup attempt was failing, the four committed seppuku, which is also known as harakiri. So it's a ritualized form of suicide. However, his literary works are not only about political ideas. Underneath the surface of the plot, they often deal with very profound, almost philosophical reflections on the relationship between things like beauty, eroticism, decay, and death. And in particular, the novel I'm going to talk about today, this is focused on the specific philosophy of beauty and of aesthetics, but also the danger of destruction. Questions like how does beauty affect people? What positive but also negative destructive sides can an obsessive preoccupation with beauty bring out in people? What role do our character flaws play in this? What relationship do we have to beauty, to eroticism, to destruction and death? And it is also about a Zen Buddhist reflection on whether knowledge or action is the higher value. All these themes are masterfully explored in the 1956 novel The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. I read the book in the latest German translation, so all my quotes, all the following quotes from the novel, are not taken from one of the official English translations, but these are my own translations from the German version into English. So you may, if you're checking with your copy, you may notice some differences probably. So let me start with a spoiler alert. I think it is impossible to talk about this book in any meaningful way without spoiling the ending. So if you can't handle spoilers, I'm afraid this video might not be for you. You then better check out the usual blurb found on the book cover or on Amazon, which doesn't tell you really a lot about the book. Maybe it can serve as an appetizer, but for any in-depth review of this book, it's necessary to talk about the ending of the book. Okay, but let's do this one step after the other. Let's take a look at the plot first, and then talk about what I think are the key themes and topics that Mishima touches in this book. The plot is a relatively easy, straightforward one. The main character is a young monk, or more precisely, a novice with the name Mitsugushi. So he's in his training to become a monk. We are guided through the plot of the novel from his perspective as a first-person narrator. So we witness his sometimes very complex inner world and all his thoughts. And Mitsugushi is the son of an elderly and sickly Zen priest, and Mitsugushi stutters, and therefore he is not very self-confident, and he is an outsider who will never be able to pursue any of the prestigious careers in Japan of the 1940s, such as in the military, for example. So his parents send him to a Zen Buddhist monastery, a monastery that is run by an abbot who is a friend of his father's. And so yeah, his parents' lifelong dream is that Mitsugushi will one day become an abbot himself, or the successor of this friend of his father's. And the monastery where Mitsugushi begins his novitiate is famous for a special building, the so-called Temple of the Golden Pavilion. And this Golden Pavilion had already played a special role in Mitsugushi's imagination during all his childhood as the epitome of beauty, because Mitsugushi's father had been constantly talking to him about the breathtaking beauty and the aesthetic perfection of this temple building. And when Mitsugushi finally sees this building in reality for the first time, he's almost a little disappointed. But it's only through daily observation of the building and detailed analysis of its geometrical proportions and also the study of a model of the temple that then this temple gradually regains its role as the ideal of beauty, as the epitome of beauty in his mind. And until Mitsugushi's cult of the temple's beauty really develops into an obsession. Mitsugushi's character development, on the other hand, is more of a counterpart, a counter development, precisely because he has such high ideas of beauty, of purity. He finds the behavior of the abbot, for example, unworthy, and because the abbot does not, for example, seem to take chastity very seriously. He is regularly visiting certain districts of the city, or more like red light districts, where he enjoys the company of geishas. And Mitsugushi reacts to this discrepancy between high ideals and base reality. He reacts to this with a mixture of defiance, rebelliousness, and also the neglect of his studies. And this negative development is further reinforced by a fellow student of somewhat shady, dubious character with the name of Kashiwagi. And like Mitsugushi, who stutters, Kashiwagi also has a physical defect. He has a club foot, but he deals with it in a completely different way. He is a person of utter self-confidence, and he has no qualms about using his disability as a means of intrigue, of manipulation, and for achieving his sometimes very selfish interests. And from Kashiwagi, Mitsuguchi learns that life can also mean ruthlessly exploiting others and, if necessary, destroying even things or others' lives. And so for Kashiwagi, life is not about brooding and pondering and hesitation, but it's about becoming active to achieve one's goals. And so this mixture of, on Mitsugushi's part, of an obsession with an absolute idea, with a high ideal, the beauty of the temple of the Golden Pavilion on the one side, and then the disappointment with the monastic life, and above all, the abbot's little vices and character flaws which do not match his high moral standards. And all this combined with Kashiwagi's ruthless and destructive attitude towards life and this selfish activity. All this ultimately leads to disaster, namely that Mitsugushi, in order to preserve the absolute idea of purity and beauty of the temple, sets fire to it and thus destroys it and also destroys his own future. For me, one of the most important sentences in this novel is the following, that contains some of the basic ideas already in a nutshell. It goes like this: those who concern themselves exclusively with the question of beauty unwittingly penetrate the darkest ideas of the world. I think the sentence encapsulates much of what dominates Mitsugushi's thinking and what also drives the plot forward. Focusing on beauty alone and beauty as the highest ideal, this can lead to, for example, the following dark ideas, such as destruction, the willingness to destroy anything that threatens beauty, or the other way around, destruction of the beautiful object in order to preserve it from decay and thus from the gradual loss of beauty, so to speak, just in order to preserve in a pure state the idea of its beauty. And Mitsugushi steers towards such questions because his admiration of the beauty of the temple actually develops in a kind of obsession. And he's stating this himself. He says, "Oh, my interest and the questions I asked myself were solely about beauty." And a little bit further, the Golden Pavilion enveloped me with its absoluteness. Did I possess it, or was I possessed by it? Very, but may also may be better translate to this as was I obsessed by it? I don't know. But there's also a downside in human characters, which Mishima reveals to us here. There's also as a counterweight to this, to having this high idea of beauty, there's also in us a sort of a desire to desecrate and humiliate beauty as an act of profanation. So and this is depicted, for example, in a scene in which an American soldier appears at the monastery with his Japanese girlfriend, and he quarrels with her, and they start an actual fight. And at some point, the American soldier orders Mitsugushi to kick the Japanese woman in the stomach and in the chest, and which Mitsugushi does with a kind of perverse joy. And even afterwards, he feels something like fascination for this monstrous act, and he reflects on it. And it says things like this: so my deed had settled in my memory like gold dust, and its glitter constantly stinging in my eyes, the glitter of evil. Or in his youth, while still a schoolboy at home, there was a small but I think symptomatic incident is described when he secretly scratches the varnish of a valuable weapon out of disgust for its flawlessness and the flawlessness of its owner, and out of a desire for destruction, for desecration. So I think this brings us to an important core idea. It is exactly the vulnerability and transience that make something beautiful valuable. In a world where everything lasts forever and is indestructible, beauty has no value whatsoever. It is the knowledge of the transience and the fragility of beauty that gives it value. So Mitsugushi says something like this: the pavilion was no longer an indestructible building. It had, so to speak, been transformed into a symbol of the transience of the world. This idea made the real Golden Pavilion so beautiful that it was every bit as good as my wildest fantasies. So, and then it was his contact with his classmate Kashiwagi that particularly reinforced in Mitsugushi this idea. He says, as I got to know Kashiwagi better, I realized that it was lasting beauty that he found really repugnant. His preference was, for example, for music that faded away immediately, or flower arrangements that wilted after a few days. Right? And this flirtation with decay and destruction then spreads further into Mitsugushi's life. It spills over, so to speak. So from the primary object of his desire for destruction, the temple, to a desire to destroy also his own future. And so he commits one act of sacrilege after another, or an act of stupidity against the abbot, and therefore squandering even the slightest chance that the abbot will consider him as the designated successor, as had been originally planned. Another idea of Mitsugushi's reflections on beauty is that in order to be able to worship beauty as an ideal beauty, the beautiful object must not become part of ourselves. It must remain an object separate from us. And however, this clear separation and distinction, but also carries a risk, a risk that the emotion towards it will change. It might even be reversed. So what was once revered may at one point become an object of hatred and despise. And we also encounter this facet in Mitsugushi's thoughts and characters. He says, beauty, beauty is my mortal enemy. So based on these reflections, the novel's world of ideas, it gradually moves into an even more abstract level. The question in the end, is rather whether is the connection, or rather the difference between knowledge and action. So which of the two is superior? I think this also seems to be an important question at the heart of Zen Buddhism. And in this novel, this contrast is discussed as well. And it is represented, I think, by Mitsugushi and Kashiwagi as two people representing these different approaches. Mitsugushi is initially a clear proponent of knowledge, or a reflection. He says, nothing else can change the slightest thing in the world. Only knowledge can. Or he says, man needs knowledge as a means of enduring life. Kashiwagi, on the other hand, is a man of action. Action, including also evil action, manipulative action, and destructive action. And in the end, Mitsugushi also allows himself to be drawn onto this dark side of the ideological spectrum. He commits the evil act and destructive act that changes everything. It destroys the ideal of beauty around which his entire life and thinking had revolved until then. But still, until shortly before the end, he remains torn between whether the action is necessary and meaningful or not. So he says something like, so my lengthy conscientious preparations ultimately served only to realize that I do not need to carry out the deed. Or a little later, oh yes, I had to do it precisely because it was futile. So, and in the end, he does it. He destroys not only the temple, but also his future. Incidentally, the plot is not entirely fictional. In 1950, there was actually a case in Japan of a temple being set on fire by a young monk for reasons very similar to those described in the novel. And you know that Mishima had studied this case intensively, and he had also interviewed the perpetrator, the arsonist, in prison. So, in summary, that is, I think, a very profound novel about the connection between beauty and death, eroticism and destruction. It's a psychogram of an obsession. It's a philosophical novel about the tension between knowledge and action, and also for us Westerners, an exciting insight into the culture and thought patterns of Japanese traditions and Zen Buddhism. If you want to immerse yourself in these worlds of thought, and if you appreciate first-person narrators who analyze and dissect their own motives and emotions in great depth and detail in a way that sometimes reminds me of, for example, Marcel Proust, then this novel is just right for you. Personally, I'm very curious to learn more about the literary works of this partly controversial author, and I'm very much looking forward to watching the videos of my Italian booktube friends about his other works and all the videos that have been published also this very same day. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching this video. Let me know in the comments whether you enjoyed it or whether you know Mishima and Mishima's works, and whether you have read this novel or any other of his works and how you think about it. That would be very interesting to me. So thanks for watching. Have a great time. Take care. Bye bye and ciao.